The Buddhist Moral Landscape, Ethics from the Indian Subcontinent. Buddhism began sometime in the 6th century BCE with Siddhartha Gautama. For a bit of context, this would roughly correspond to the time of Jeremiah the prophet. The word Buddha simply means enlightened one, and there have been several Buddhas, but when one talks about the Buddha, one is referring to Gautama. Legend has it that Gautama was an Indian prince who was shielded from all suffering by his parents by means of being confined to the palace grounds. If you've read Height, you know that Gautama sneaked out from the palace and there confronted suffering in the form of age, sickness, and death, and finally serenity. This is known as the Four Passing Signs. Before going on, let us look at the spread of Buddhism. For the first 100 years, Buddhism spread quickly throughout India, threatening to displace Hinduism. Hinduism's resurgence pushed Buddhism geographically in two directions. From what is now Sri Lanka, Buddhism moved into Southeast Asia. This is known as Theravada, or smaller vessel Buddhism, and is characterized by a smaller canon, though it is still quite large, and has acquired fewer of the characteristics of the regions in which it grew. It also moved north and then west towards Afghanistan and then east into Tibet, China, Indochina, and Korea. From China, it then spread to Japan. This is Mahayana, or larger vessel school. Perhaps the most well-known form of Mahayana Buddhism is Zen, which started out in China but has thrived in Japan. Mahayana is the largest school of Buddhism, as one might guess from its name. And then there is Tibetan Buddhism. Now, I had been taught that this was simply a peculiar form of Mahayana Buddhism. It is now common to see Tibetan Buddhism as a school in its own right. Buddhism is said to have come by four noble truths in his teaching, each linked to the other. The first is that to live is to suffer. This is what the Buddha saw in the first three of the four passing signs. This in turn gives rise to a question. Why is there suffering? Traditionally, the second noble truth is seen as answering that question. We suffer because we have desires. Desires always trip us up because we either always end up losing what we desire, or what we obtain no longer satisfies our desire, or our desires cause harm. This leads to the third noble truth. To end suffering, one must end desire. How then to end desire? The fourth noble truth is to follow the Eightfold Path. And path is an important word here. It suggests an approach to life rather than a set of beliefs. It suggests a disposition. Take right understanding. Let us say that I tell a joke and none of you laugh, which is common enough. What should I take from that? That the joke wasn't very funny? Or perhaps that I have a lousy sense of timing and cannot tell a joke to save my neck? Right understanding is learning the right lesson from what one experiences. Learning the right lesson depends on right mindfulness. Mindfulness is simply paying attention. You may hear a Buddhist say that we suffer from something called monkey brain. It is that incessant internal dialogue or stream of consciousness that goes on in our heads all the time. Excessive rumination means we are not paying attention or being mindful of what is going on, whether around us or in us. That is the reason for practices such as concentrating on one's breathing or the number of steps one takes. It is a way to discipline the mind to be aware of what is all around. When one pays attention, one picks up on the subtle clues all around. Does this sound like work? Well, yes. Mindfulness requires a certain amount of effort of the right sort, which requires some sort of action, again, of the right sort, and so on and so forth. The Eightfold Path can be seen as a way of developing certain virtues and developing a sense of perspective, which incidentally is somewhat similar to a Western school called Stoicism. In ethics, if one starts with right action, say, one should be able to make a connection with right livelihood and the others. Say your occupation supports some criminal activity. This may involve a fair bit of lying. Your intentions are then skewed. You are directing your attention away from what you ought to do due to a lack of mindfulness. And in the end, all your actions become tainted. Take a few minutes. In fact, you can pause the video at this point and review some of these terminologies. You'll see that I've given page references to height in them. To review, Buddhism is often known as the middle way, a life that avoids the extremes and seeks harmony and balance in life and in society. It is an open and generous heart that cannot see human suffering without attempting to relieve it. For class, take special notice of the relationship between wealth and the Buddhist moral tradition.